So, good morning, everyone. Happy first day of spring for all of you that follow the kind of equinoxes. And then I was also told today is International Happy Day or something to be happy about. And I was like, yes, we are going to be happy today about the efforts we are trying to do in adopting SysML v2 and we prepare for this transition. And I'm happy the fact that this room is packed. This continues to demonstrate to me and to my leadership the importance of this community, the involvement you guys have both from across the government, industry, academia, coming together to actually drive change and recognizing the value that this has for a broader defense industrial base and from my perspective, national security. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about kind of where I'm trying to take the department as we think about digital engineering interoperability and what does that look like. But I wanted to start for many of you who may not be fully aware of the DoD with obligatory org charts. So the DoD is a massive organization, if you didn't know that. We now have a Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Pete Hegseth. We now have a Deputy Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Feinberg, I think. So he was just sworn in on the 17th. Underneath him, he has what is called his principal staff assistants. Each one of those boxes is presidential appointee, Senate confirmed. And so we have a nominee, so Mr. Michaels, for the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. So each one of those boxes already has a nominee. I don't pretend to keep up to date on all of those. But within the R&E family, there's the Undersecretary, the Deputy Undersecretary. Both are political appointees, Senate confirmed. Then you go down to everyone above that with the ASD levels. There's Assistant Secretary of Defenses. All of those are political appointees, Senate confirmed. So that's if you ever wondered why people's names say honorable. Honorable means you have been Senate confirmed. So in the federal government, there's political appointees where you don't have to be Senate confirmed, and then Senate confirmed positions. The Senate confirmed positions are written into law. So Title 10 of the law says the DoD shall have X number and they shall do all these kind of things. So you can imagine at kind of the OSD layer, there's a lot going on because we're trying to get ready for all of these layers of political appointees that come in. And some of this is just the realities of the transition. I don't want anyone to, this is just how normal transitions work at OSD. Every administration comes in and it just takes time. So it's a little bit of an opportunity for us to continue to demonstrate because obviously there's people that are performing the duties of, is what it's called at the level, but so that's where we work. So I sit underneath the Undersecretary. We go down to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Mission and Capability, and inside that is the Systems Engineering and Architecture Executive Directorate. So we have the kind of broad responsibility to really focus on a couple key areas. The first, obviously, for me is digital engineering. We're really investing in the importance of integrating models to drive better decision making. We also do a lot with our MOSA. So if you've seen on the LinkedIn page, the MOSA guidebook came out. That came out of kind of the office that I support. We do a lot with value engineering, both things required by law. And then we also have the Defense Standards Program. If you're familiar with that, they manage all of the standards and especially the interactions with all the non-government agencies for the standards bodies and things like that. So just all of that's part of this systems engineering and architecture family. And we've really had to rethink as we kind of focus on what does this transition look like and trying to pull and really dive into what our most senior leaders are trying to drive towards. So we're seeing that our senior leaders are looking to reform the acquisition process. And in fact, Secretary Hegseth during his nominee confirmation hearing talked about how we do prototyping and experimentation, we throw it away because we don't do digital design. The next sentence went off and talked about some other stuff. That's fine, he's the secretary. But the follow-on thought for us is, well, why aren't we doing that? is because we don't have the digital ecosystems, we don't have the standards, we don't have all that in place, and that's the opportunity for this community to come in to show the value, to show how something like SysML v2 is going to let you do experimentation and prototyping digitally, let you show how you're going to influence decision makers faster. And that's really the opportunity that we're really trying to drive in as we think about the value of digital engineering to the broader community. Now, part of this transition effort for me is we're having to explain to obviously a wide range of staffers and all sorts of other things that we're not going to get into, the role of engineering across the DoD. And so I'm a big believer that engineering is how we take technology and we turn it into operational warfighting capability. The consumer market has already figured this out. It's not a, here's an AI technology, oh, turn that into a thing. There's a product. The product is the thing that the consumers need. Just like that analogy, the department relies on operational capabilities. Our warfighters don't get just handed an AI chip and go, great, this can do matrix multiplications a whole lot faster. They're going to go, great, what am I supposed to do with this? I need a capability. How does this help me understand whether or not there's a bad guy on the other side of that hill? How does this help me plan whether or not that we're going to have the logistics capability? How does this help me? That's the capability. And so that's really where I think the role of engineering is critical. As engineers, we need to be educating our consumers, our marketers, that it's the engineering piece is how we take those technologies, turn them into capabilities. Valley of Death. So part of my challenge that I'm running into now is I'm having to constantly explain in the 3-second elevator rides that go from the Pentagon as riding up the escalators, what is digital engineering? And the simplest version I've come up to, especially for software, people that understand software, is digital engineering is just engineering on a CI/CD pipeline. When we communicate with some of the companies that we look to as being the furthest out there in kind of this capability, things like the SpaceX and some of the John Deere and Ford, what they're doing is they are doing all of their constant engineering, they're delivering their models, they're operating as if they are on a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. So that is the simplified vision of what does that lets us accelerate, that lets us make better decisions earlier. By having that integration, that continuous delivery approach, we move ourselves off documents and into more of an integrated environment. However, I'm going to be the first to admit that the DoD is a whole lot of puzzle pieces that are trying to work together. And no single engineering discipline can see the whole picture. The realities of the department, from how we think about supply chain, from how we deliver capability, to how we acquire IP rights, requires a lot of people working together. So I really think about the fact that we can look at the fact and see all these disciplines, and what we see is that no single engineering discipline has the full picture. I would say that in a room full of systems engineers, that we probably would have the best chance of seeing that full picture, but we need to recognize where we have our limits and breadth, and the collaboration we have to have with the cost estimators, with the program managements, with the realities of the kind of economic, political climate, and where we need to pull that picture together. One of the things that we're constantly working is trying to figure out how do we accelerate and change our processes. And so even if I could take all these processes that we have across the department and better integrate them, I'd have gaps. We know this, we understand this. We understand that our policies prevent us at times, but there's gaps in how we do this because we haven't considered the realities of some of the supply chain considerations, the considerations of the way we think about critical minerals. All of these are some of the gaps that we have to start really getting ready to start addressing. So what I like to think about is the fact that we can start adding the pieces of the puzzle. This is adding more rigor, adding more capability in our engineering discipline, adding the ability for us to do things like digital threads to help really connect decisions from the earliest engineering enterprise architectures all the way down to the digital twins that are really making decisions, and we're able to kind of get that operation sustainment value. We can start adding that rigor. But once again, you'll notice in my puzzle pieces here, that it still doesn't paint the picture. This took a lot of time, by the way, to make all those animations. I just want you guys to know that. So we still have to work. We, as the community and systems engineers, really need to be that forefront, the tip of the spear of working with our brethren in the engineering communities to focus on aligning objectives. Focus on the fact that there's a difference between an ideal engineering solution and an engineered solution in the political context of today. And that sometimes an engineered solution of just connect to A to B makes sense to us, but the realities of the kind of department requires us to rethink and develop engineered solutions that exist in that context. But how do we continue to translate all that data? So one of the observations is the fact that right now the puzzle pieces don't quite align. That's our next gap. As we continue to address the people, the process, and our standards, that's our final gap that we're trying to drive into. And so only when do we actually address the standards do we start to get that holistic vision, which gets us back to the objective of engineering on a CI/CD pipeline. So that to me is why I care a lot about addressing our processes, why I care a lot about investing in our standards. So the engineers across the department, there's many of us. This list is just outside of mission systems, these are the ones that are recognized within the OPM job categories. I have a whole separate speech about the fact that OPM hasn't updated our engineering job categories since 2008. That is a discussion for Steve. Go talk to him. He knows this soapbox already. But so the department has over 150,000 engineers. We have to think about how are we guiding and communicating and showing the value to those engineers, additionally to the over 300,000 in the industrial base. The community that we have to look across is massive. 450,000 people, engineers driving trying to drive and focus on the mission. All of you, if you are in the industrial base, care about the mission. You care about national security. So we have this opportunity to go, how do we help communicate? How do we align all of these disciplines together to drive and address those standards? At the same time, we're also trying to re-modernize the way we think about standards. We have grown up in a world where standards have been written as Word files that then get printed off and put into a bookshelf. We have taken that and turned them into PDF files that have now exist in a folder that still requires the person to sit there and analyze them. For some of you know, I used to work at the National Reconnaissance Office. I had printed out a lot of my OMG standards. I had the SysML standard, I have the UML standard, I had the MOF, I had the object constraint language, I had all of them, and I would literally walk around to meetings plopping all the standards down and going, let's have a real conversation about this. But what we're needing to do is to change that paradigm, because that's still required on us to kind of be that synthesis layer. So it was necessary for us going forward is to think about how do we transition into more kind of a digital first. How do we build our standards so that way the computer can take part in this? How do we try to address some of that? We're investing in that in things like where we're creating digital first data item descriptions. So that's something that we're trying to invest in, where we can actually focus on things like we have MIL standards that literally say this wire shall be red, this wire shall be green. We're like, wouldn't that be great if we just captured that as a SysML artifact that you guys then can just pull in and go, yep, we're here, we're conformant, like versus the trust me, we're conformant. So we're trying to think about how we drive and make that changes to get the value. And so that's where we're trying to go. And this is across all the standards that the DoD operates within. And we're trying to think about how do we build this out so that way we can use the technology that we see that's coming around the corner and invest that into the communities so we can get the benefit. We can unlock your guys' potential to let you guys not do How many people still do PowerPoint engineering? So actually have you guys do the hard engineering part and let the computer lean more on the compliance, the verification side of the house. At the same time, one of the other realizations for me is the fact that the standardscape requires us to better understand what's out there. This is kind of a little bit of a chart that I kind of use just to high level talk about the vision. But frequently when people come to me, they go, well, you're the policy shop. Why don't you just write a policy that says thou shalt do blank? And I go, I would love to write that policy, but the realities of the DoD prevents me from doing that for all these reasons. Title 10 says I can't do that because that would be a blah, 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 blah. I can get into all that. But part of that foundational issue is the fact that the DoD needs resilience. We are never going to select a singular standard for anything. However, we recognize that having 17 standards is too many. So, okay, let's apply some best practices. How do we down select down to 3 or 5 standards that are actually meaningful for us as the broader kind of defense industrial base to coalesce around and say, these are the ones that we feel like are going to be adding value, where the community can be investing in, our academic layer can actually educate to, that the industry can contract to. That's what we're trying to think about, of how do we drive towards that. Now, there's a lot of work. This is a vision statement of trying to get to that point. And I recognize that there's cases where we may not have standards. Or the standard right now is, well, per the contract requirement, I'm delivering you a PDF. My favorite was that in order for a program to show an immutable version of their requirements, they exported out of Cameo. They exported a requirements diagram into a PNG to import it back into Cameo as a screenshot, as an image on a diagram, so that way the lawyers were happy, as that was the official immutable version of it, even though they were on Teamwork Cloud and all the constraints, and it just, this is the reality we live in. And so we're trying to work and address a lot of those challenges. So how does something like SysML to me fit in into that? Well, SysML version 2, with its textual syntax capability, its API kind of embedded in nature, really achieves and drives towards that vision. The fact that systems engineering by its nature is an inherently an interoperability discipline, that we need to specialize in being able to communicate and talk with all of those other 16 engineering disciplines I listed, and build that rapport with them and to communicate. Additionally, I'm a big believer in responding to the demand signal. One of the things that OSD, I'm well aware of, OSD has, I will rephrase this. The government sometimes has the ability to show up $1 late and a day short. This was really an opportunity that the community came to us and said, we know this is going to be a problem. OSD, you need to start investing into that. I said, yes, I agree. So that's how we really focused a lot on what does a transition effort really look like. So we're really working through, and a lot of great collaboration with Sandy across across my DoD military services via the Navy, Air Force, and the Navy, Air Force, and Army. Oh, I almost got in trouble there. They're turning 240 here in 7 days. So if you know someone in the Army, wish them happy birthday. So the scale of that challenge is critical. One of the things that we did when we first started this effort was we just called up the 3 major government providers of kind of licensing and said, roughly how many models do you have? And that's where we got that 30,000 number. That number, realistically, based on kind of conversations, is probably north of 60,000 models that need to be considered for the transition. Because we operate in worlds where there's models that exist on our prime contractors, there's models that exist on networks that we weren't even talking about. This was just the unclassified level. If you know the DoD, we love our network classifications, and then we throw more compartments on top of that. And so there's models across all of that that need to be part of this transition. And this transition requires us to rethink both the kind of scope of the individual models, but also the workforce. We're thinking the fact that engineering, our systems engineering products are used by about a quarter of the engineering workforce. So a quarter of that 450,000 engineers are going to be affected by this, and not in the like directly, but as their products that they rely on will be affected. And that's the scale of the opportunity that we have to get in front of this, to address the change that we're trying to get to. So all of this to me builds into some great capability that we're looking to on the importance of standards. So some of the products that we started building out for the community, you can find all of these on the OMG wiki page. We've produced things around some FAQs. We've worked to create a kind of starter model, where conversion process and things like that. I'm sure Sandy will, or somebody will probably talk more about all the specifics of that. The team is a lot smarter than I am on anything around that. But really all this to me is about the fact that we're continuing to drive and think about what are the challenges that the community has. How do we lay the framework for you guys to start executing? How do we communicate across? And so one of the big things that we did is we built a community across the federal government. So it initially started just as the DoD, but we actually started to expand into NASA and Department of Energy and said, great, let's all start talking and sharing how you're thinking about transitioning. So we're come together and we get presentations from kind of innovative companies that are trying to do things. We get presentations from other federal agencies around how they're using AI to create SysML version 2 models and things like that, to really unlock the creative space for us to understand how the capabilities that version 2 is going to give us is necessary for the department going forward. So obviously we're here today talking about the technical meeting, the upcoming events. Don't pay attention to that right now for all the reasons you guys can imagine. So we will reassess all that going forward. We're investing heavily in sharing technology to share and collaborate virtually. We're investing in things at the controlled unclassified level to build the community, so we're going to invest more in virtual technologies and virtual capabilities, so we can at least continue the conversation because just the current climate around travel. So one of the things for me as I look at this community is the kind of life cycle of the community. And I'm really looking for something like SysML v2 to be a transition for me for how we can be involved in other transitions, how I can be involved in taking the lessons learned from this community and apply it to other standards, how I can apply it to other transitions and to address the gaps that need to happen. So right now, I'd probably put us somewhere in that active community where we're still doing a lot of work. I know that we're still going to work on developing things like an API and some service guidance, some transition readiness assessment tool to really help the department understand if a model and the community and the program is ready. Because there's going to be times that we're going to come to a program and say, you are so far down the line that it doesn't make sense for you to transition, that the department needs to accept some of that technical debt. And that's going to be okay. We'll have to work through a lot of that going forward. There's some things below the line. One of the things that we're still tossing up is, do we need to create a cheat sheet? Is that a demand signal from the community? This is an opportunity, not like, don't start yelling things out now. Come talk to Frank Salvatore later is the real answer. What are the challenges that you guys are starting to think about? What do you need to better communicate back to your leadership the value of SysML v2? What are some of the gaps in the knowledge? So we're thinking about a cheat sheet, model conformity. How do we better drive things like the digital thread aspects of it? How do we maybe build out some examples and things like that? Over time, I'm expecting, and so I don't want this to be a surprise to any of you, as the community continues to grow, my involvement will slowly start backing down because the community becomes self-sufficient. My job at OSD is to come in and start that flywheel. Once that flywheel starts going, you guys are the power that keeps it rolling, because then I need to go off and start addressing the next standard. And so we're going to continue to be involved. I don't want to downplay any of that, but as we think about interoperability across all of that to drive to the standards that I talked about earlier, it's going to require us to move and transition, and we need to continue to be agile. So the community, you guys need to keep growing and demonstrating, but as we kind of move into this transitioning phase, looking forward in a little over a year, as we think about what that means, that's really where it's going to be an opportunity for you guys to continue to be the leaders, the stewards, the champions of this effort. So where am I trying to go? So I'm going back to my map of kind of the engineering disciplines. The obvious star for me right now is kind of that enterprise mission engineering space, looking at the transition around UAF. I believe it's 1.3 to version 2. And then really trying to drive a little bit more into disciplines around software and industry. And when industrial, what I'm trying to get to is manufacturability, the kind of reliability, the critical supply chain aspects of it is kind of what I bucket all that under. Because that's the next big gap for us as we think about trying to drive all of this, of how do we continue to think about what are the standards needed for us to achieve the kind of vision and communication gap. How do I live in a world where software defines everything? What are the standards that I need to embed in to better understand how we communicate from systems through standards, through the hardware disciplines? And so that's the next big gap that we're going to try addressing after we go look at UAF version 2. Once again, demand signal. So if the community comes to us and goes, that's not really the demand signal, Daniel, I recognize my own bias. Maybe the demand signal is 3D manufacturing and 3D printing. Okay, let's have that conversation. Maybe we need to go invest in there and kick that flywheel down the road. We've looked at that one and just the number of potential standards that are out there. There's like 15 some odd most common standards. Once again, back to my initial thesis of 15 is too many for the department. I got to figure out how to down select that. So what are some of the other things that we're working on? One is we released a digital engineering tool evaluation criteria template called Detect. So this is really an opportunity for you guys, for the community to better understand and do some trade-offs. I've been in the government long enough. The amount of times that I have seen where we do tool trade-offs and we are reinventing the wheel for trade-offs drives me a little nuts. But at the same time, I also recognize that on the policy side of the house, that we tend to write policies that can really only work for the big primes. And so we took that realization and said, well, what are the core set of requirements that we would want to a small team out of Redstone Test Arsenal? What are the core set of requirements that we want them to understand? And how is that different than the big set of requirements that we would impose on a program like Sentinel? Because too often we walk around and we go, here's all your requirements for establishing a digital ecosystem. Here's your needs around kind of thinking about compute and storage. And then we go, well, the only answer is Sentinel and B21 are the only programs that could ever do that. And then trying to separate that from, you're a small team working with a systems engineer and a mechanical engineer. What are your needs? What are the kind of data storage requirements that you have? How do we understand that? And how do we better position you to make those decisions? So all of that's driving to me for this Detect is investing in the standards so we can understand a lot of the great work that's happening. Had a great conversation recently with it's one of the OMG communities around digital ecosystem. Is that what it's called, Frank? Yeah. And the kind of orchestration, the kind of separation of a garage band is very different than a big symphony that your garage and the Sydney Opera House. Those are two different things. And so there's a lot of synergies there, and that's one where we're looking to continue to be more involved in some of that going forward. That was weird. So I also have a community of practice. So this has grown throughout my tenure. Once again, this is meant to be for the Department of Defense. It is meant to be a service to the practitioner. It is one that we are continuing to focus on thematic issues. So we've done ones around SysML v2, around AI, and so we're continuing to demonstrate that. One of the ones that the community came to us and said, we really need to understand and hear from is an opportunity to hear from the various the vendors in the space. Kind of a single day of, hey, let's all talk about how given some notional problem scenario, how the vendors can address that, because you as the vendor communities, for my vendors out there, we have access to one of the biggest markets, but we need to provide you guys the right place, and I need to provide an even playing field for all the companies, from my small little companies all the way to my bigger kind of vendors. And so that's one where we're really working through that to provide that capability. We're continuing to drive in and talk about how we can talk about integration of physical models and digital models, the kind of digital twins. One of the collaborations I have across my portfolio is through the modeling and simulation side of the house, is the classic analytics side of the house of engineering analytics, the work they do in things like finite element analysis. How are we seeing places like AFRL? How are we seeing places like our FFRDCs and even in the industry where they are doing innovative things to integrate our systems models down with that level, and how are they making better decisions faster? So that's one where we're really bringing the community together to talk and share some of these lessons. I do want to continue all of you to remind that our digital engineering body of knowledge is a resource for you guys, the community. It is powered and driven by your needs. You guys say, this is our challenge, this is what we're looking for. So we're constantly putting resources up there to better connect and show how things interplay. We're also investing a lot in a calendar. So it's one of those that the community came to us and said, it's hard for us to understand all the potential events that are related to digital engineering. I said, it's a challenge. Let's go solve that. So we started creating a calendar of events to really be a function for you guys in the community to kind of understand and see what's out there. So I kind of want to end on my last two slides here. The first is some key takeaways for me as I think about how do we driving towards embedding more standards into the community. The first is we need to be aware of existing standards. So we stand here within the object management group, but there's a lot of other standards bodies that exist across the United States and even internationally. So in the United States, ASME, IEEE, IEF, like those are all critical standards bodies that we need to be collaborating with and understanding. Too often we find ourselves in situations where it's not invented here syndrome. We need to make sure that when we recognize good work that's happening, we need to go, how do we help drive that instead of going, well, it's not being invented here, therefore it's incorrect. My other one is to focus really on interoperability standards. And what I mean a lot for that for me is the fact that at the end of the day, the DoD is a contracting organization. As much as I would love to live in a world where everything is going to just magically connect across all of our vendors and things like that, the reality of the situation is the DoD exists in multiple levels of classifications across multiple prime companies. Those primes have subs. We're always going to need to exchange models and simulation data, and how do we invest in that? And so that's the thing I'm really focusing on, is what is the classic flat file binaries that we can send to each other and still have it integrated as best as we can. I love the vision of an integrated, complete, soup to nuts digital thread, but the scale of the DoD is going to prevent us from doing that, and that's why we need to be investing in those standards that help us communicate and share our models and share our data. And continue to find out, pull from industry. We see this a lot with industry and the challenges of the government. Of industry has maybe solved a thing. One of the things we're always looking for is, where does the government need to change? As kind of at the OSC level, we're always thinking about, for all my DoD people, the .mil PF. Before you jump straight to the solution is go acquire a thing, there's all these other things that you have to go look at to understand whether or not you can change something about your policy, whether or not you can change something about your training, whether or not you can change something about your organization. And that's one that we're really looking to understand of, are the gaps really on the policy? Are there policy gaps? Are the policies preventing us from doing things? Help us understand a lot of that going forward, because that's what we're really looking for as we continue to invest in these standards development organizations. And that's really where I think the power of a group like OMG coming together, that brings the perspective of government, that brings the needs of government, that brings the solutions of industry, and that brings the kind of knowledge and capabilities of academia together into a unified place is really strong. So kind of my get off the stage side, I'm a big reader. It's one of those that the Marine Corps Commandant releases his reading list. I don't pretend to be the Marine Corps Commandant, but I like the kind of expectation that he is setting for. The fact that we need to be readers and we need to be constantly learning and constantly evolving. So I've highlighted a couple things for the community here. If you want kind of more change management books, things like Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. Maybe you need some better understanding of how to manage your calendar. That was definitely something for me. So that would be something like Uptime. One of the challenges that we have in the community is our ability to tell stories. So how to elevate our storytelling is that one. Maybe you enjoy reading more technical papers. That's okay. I love me a good technical paper. Here's some here. Things like Unified Framework and Survey. I don't need to read it. Dr. Martin's the 7 Samurais of Systems Engineering. And I also like Excuse Me, Sir, Madam, Which Model. That was another good technical paper coming out of Nkosi. And then finally, just maybe you're more into podcasts or movies. I recommend, if you want to understand the DoD and acquisition process, if you have not seen Pentagon Wars, go watch it. It is a lovely movie. I went so far down the rabbit hole where I was on phone calls with HBO trying to get licenses to show it in a movie theater. Turns out because it was a direct to TV, they never actually had and I wasn't a big enough market to have them go off and create a movie theater license for that one. But I highly recommend you go watch it. It's still, I bang my head every time I watch that because it still sometimes rings true. And then obviously I'm a big fan of Bill Hammack over at the University of Illinois Urbane and the work he's doing. So those are just some top level things of how we need to think about continuing to educate and learn. You guys are the practitioners. You guys are the people doing the work. I don't want to lose sight of that. My job is to come in and think about how do I serve you guys? How do I make your guys' case up to my senior leaders? How do I communicate across the Pentagon and show how the work you guys are doing here, the work you are doing across your companies, the work you are doing in your institutions, how that is driving towards the mission that our senior leaders are telling us, that they want to move fast and they want to deliver capability. And I really think that SysML version 2 is a necessary step to achieve that mission. So with that, I'll open the floor to any questions.
Hello, Mr. Hettema. I'm Steve Abler from Northrop Grumman.
Hi.
I'm curious about your community of practice. Mm-hmm. Is that internal to the DoD or can we be part of that?
Yeah, so we run that one as both a distro A, so that is completely unclassified. We also run that at DoD parlance for you guys. So there's distro A unclassified, you guys can join. Then we run a special distro C level, so that is US government and contractors. And then we also sometimes do distro D, which is DoD and contractors. So there's some requirements that we put on just to make sure that people have the need to know kind of thing to meet the CR requirements. You can work with Frank and I, and we can get you guys at least the invite across the community, because a lot of what we do is distro A level, because we really feel like sometimes the burden of the CY constraints is overburdened for the value that we're trying to add to the community. So work with Frank and I, and we can get you the invite.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Again, thank you, Daniel. That was enlightening and very forward-looking, and we're really pleased that you came here, and we're pleased that we have a role in working with you on your projects to help move all this forward.